Everyone blames Julius Caesar for burning the Library of Alexandria. Here's the problem. The library survived him. It kept running for another 400 years and was actually destroyed by 4 different disasters. One of them, a targeted religious massacre most people have never heard of. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly who did it, when, and why the One Big Fire story is one of the most successful myths in history. For 2,000 years, one story has dominated. Julius Caesar sails into Alexandria in 48 BCE, torches the harbor, and with it, the greatest collection of knowledge the ancient world ever built. Roll credits. Humanity loses. It's clean, it's dramatic, it fits in a tweet. It's also mostly wrong. And the truth is so much stranger and so much more damning that historians are still arguing about it. What the library actually was. First, what are we even talking about? The Library of Alexandria was founded around the early 3rd century BCE under the Ptolemaic dynasty, the Greek kings who ruled Egypt after Alexander the Great. It wasn't a quiet reading room. It was closer to a state-funded research institute, attached to a scholarly community called the Museum. Literally the shrine of the muses, that's where we get the word museum. Ships docking in Alexandria's harbor were reportedly searched for scrolls, which were confiscated, copied, and the copies handed back while the originals stayed in the library. Estimates for how many scrolls it held range wildly, anywhere from 40,000 to 400,000, because ancient sources disagree and nobody kept a spreadsheet. Scholars there mapped the stars, measured the circumference of the earth, dissected the human body for the first time in the Greek world. This wasn't a myth. This part is real, which makes what happened to it even more painful. The Caesar fire. What really happened in 48 BCE? So let's deal with Caesar first, because this is where the myth was born. In 48 BCE, Caesar arrived in Alexandria backing Cleopatra in a civil war against her brother. He got boxed in near the harbor, and to stop enemy ships from cutting off his escape, he ordered his own men to set fire to the fleet docked there. Alexandria's harbor district was packed with warehouses, and some ancient writers say those warehouses were storing scrolls, possibly overflow from the library itself. The Greek biographer Plutarch, writing more than a century later, is one of the sources most often cited for the claim that this fire spread and consumed the Great Library. But here's what most retellings leave out. Multiple other ancient writers, including Strabo, who lived in Alexandria just a couple of decades after the fire, describe the library and its scholars as very much still active. If the fire had wiped out the whole institution, you'd expect the guy living there right afterward to mention it. He doesn't, not directly. Modern historians' best reconstruction. Caesar's fire probably destroyed some scrolls, likely warehouse stock waiting to be cataloged, possibly damaged nearby library buildings. But the library as an institution survived. Caesar accidentally singed history's greatest bookstore. He didn't burn it down. And yet his name became the answer to a pub quiz question for 2,000 years, while the people who actually finished the job got away clean. The slow bleed, war, empire, and an earthquake. So if Caesar didn't do it, what did? The answer is everything slowly over the next 4.5 centuries. Alexandria stayed a major cultural center under Roman rule, but its prestige and its funding eroded as Rome's political center of gravity shifted elsewhere. Then in the late 3rd century CE, the city was hit by military crackdowns under the emperors Aurelian and Diocletian, both of whom besieged and sacked Alexandria while putting down rebellions, chipping further at a city and a library already in decline. Then nature took its turn. In 365 CE, a massive earthquake and tsunami devastated the Egyptian coast, and the resulting subsidence began swallowing Alexandria's royal quarter, the very district where the original library complex had stood, into the sea. Whatever remained of the founding library's physical home was, quite literally, sinking, but there was a backup. A second collection, a daughter library, had been established in the Serapeum, a massive temple to the god Serapis, built on higher, safer ground. It survived the flood. It survived the earthquake. What it did not survive was people. Theophilus and the destruction of the Serapeum. 391 CE, this is the part almost nobody puts in the headline, and it should be the headline. In 391 CE, the Roman Emperor Theodosius I, a devout Christian ruler determined to stamp out paganism across the empire, issued a decree authorizing the destruction of pagan temples in Alexandria. The city's Christian bishop, Theophilus, took that decree and led a mob straight to the Serapeum. Contemporary and near-contemporary witnesses describe the aftermath in brutal detail. One writer claimed the temple was torn down to its very foundations. Another described Theophilus' followers stripping and destroying nearly everything inside, unable to remove only the massive stone blocks too heavy to carry off. The Temple of Serapis, and whatever scrolls of the daughter library still sat inside it, were annihilated not by accident, not by war, but by a targeted government-sanctioned religious purge. This is the real ending of the Library of Alexandria as most historians reconstruct it. Not a foreign general's stray fire, but a homegrown mob acting under an imperial decree, dismantling their own city's intellectual inheritance in the name of religious purity. Hypatia. The aftershock, the story doesn't stop there, and it gets one more brutal chapter. 24 years later, in 415 CE, Alexandria's most famous living scholar, the mathematician and philosopher Hypatia, was dragged from her chariot by a mob linked to the city's Christian parabolani and murdered in the street. Pop history loves to tell this as Christians killed the last great scientist, and that's when the Dark Ages began. It's a great sentence. It's also an oversimplification historians have pushed back on hard. The most contemporary accounts point to a political rivalry. Hypatia was a close advisor to Alexandria's secular governor, Orestes, who was locked in a power struggle with the increasingly authoritarian Bishop Cyril. Hypatia, a pagan woman with real political influence, became the flashpoint. She wasn't murdered in a library. She wasn't the last scholar in Alexandria. But her death, coming so soon after the Serapeum's destruction, has become the symbol of the same thing: knowledge and independent thought getting crushed by the fusion of religious zealotry and political power. The myth that won't die, the Arabs, 642 CE. Now here's the twist you were promised. There's a third villain in the popular version of this story, and this one is almost entirely fictional. The legend goes that in 642 CE, when Arab general Omar ibn al-As conquered Alexandria, he asked Caliph Omar what to do with the city's remaining books. Omar allegedly replied that if the books agreed with the Quran, they were unnecessary, and if they disagreed, they were dangerous. So burn them all. The story claims it took 6 months to burn every scroll, using them as fuel for the city's bathhouses. It's a fantastic story. It's also, according to essentially every modern historian who's examined the sources, a fabrication that first shows up roughly 600 years after the event, written by a 13th century Christian writer with no supporting evidence from anyone who was actually there. By 642 CE, there is no credible evidence any significant library still existed in Alexandria to burn. The myth persisted anyway because it was politically convenient for later writers on multiple sides of religious conflicts, and because, frankly, it's a better story than "it died of budget cuts and an earthquake." Why the myth won, so why does everyone still blame Caesar? Or believe the Arab conquest story instead of the actual, well-documented culprit? Because one dramatic fire, one famous villain, is a story your brain can hold on to. 4 centuries of war, imperial neglect, a tsunami, and a religiously motivated mob acting under a legal decree from their own emperor is not a story, it's a syllabus. Edward Gibbon, the towering 18th century historian, was among the first major voices to point squarely Theophilus and Theodosius, calling the bishop a corrupt enemy of virtue. But by the time Gibbon wrote that, the tidier legends about Caesar and the Arabs had a 1,000-year head start. So the next time someone tells you Julius Caesar burned the Library of Alexandria, you'll know the truth is worse. It wasn't one man, one army, or one afternoon. It was slow institutional starvation, imperial politics, natural disaster, and finally, a mob acting with the full blessing of the state, finishing off what centuries of neglect had already gutted. The Library of Alexandria wasn't murdered. It was let die, one decision at a time.